Sheikh Yasser orchestrated the terrorist plot against a church in Canada on Christmas Eve. How Sheikh Yasser orchestrated the Christmas Eve terrorist plot. 1. Motivation and planning. After failing to kill Natasha and Wahid at their wedding, Sheikh Yasser, now based in Somalia, is determined to finish his revenge against them and the Christian community. He targets a large Christmas party in Canada where 3 churches, Sudanese, Arabic, and Canadian Baptist, are scheduled to gather. 2. Recruiting a suicide bomber undercover. Sheikh Yasser devises a plan to use a Christian convert as an inside agent. He selects a Somali young man, real name Muhammad Ahmed Mosa, but using the alias Samir, who is actually a committed jihadist. Samir is trained to convincingly pretend to be a Muslim who has converted to Christianity. 3. Creating a family cover. Samir is sent to a refugee camp in Nairobi, Kenya, to find a Somali widow or divorcee with children. He marries Halima, a woman with 7 children, to create a believable family unit. The family applies for resettlement in Canada, with Samir insisting on Canada as their destination. 4. Infiltration and building trust. Upon arrival in Calgary, Samir and Halima are welcomed by the Sudanese and Arabic Christian communities. Samir pretends to be a devout Christian, attends church, and integrates his family into church life. Halima, touched by the kindness of the Christians, genuinely converts to Christianity and brings her children to Sunday school. 5. Preparing for the attack. Samir maintains contact with Sheikh Yasser's network in Calgary, who supply him with bombs and train him on how to conceal them. The plan is for Samir to carry out a suicide bombing at the Christmas party, targeting Natasha, Wahid, and as many Christians as possible. 6. The plot unravels. On the night before the attack, Halima discovers Samir reciting the Quran and realizes he is still a committed Muslim and planning something evil. When Halima threatens to expose him, Samir strangles her to death. With help from Sheikh Yasser's local operatives, her body is disposed of. 7. Police intervention. Neighbors notice suspicious activity and call the police. The police intercept the van carrying Halima's body, leading to a shootout and the unraveling of the plot. The police search Samir's apartment and discover the bombs and a recorded video confession of his true intentions and Sheikh Yasser's involvement. The Christmas party is cancelled, and the church community is saved from a mass casualty attack. Key points of the plot. Sheikh Yasser masterminded the plot from abroad, using a fake convert and exploiting the refugee system. He relied on local accomplices for logistics, bomb supply, and cover-up. The plan was foiled due to Halima's discovery, her murder, and vigilant neighbors who alerted the authorities. Direct reference from the novel. Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din began to work on that plan as soon as he arrived in Mogadishu. He has 9 months remaining until his suicidal bomber would carry out that terrorist attack at the Christmas party in Canada. After selecting and training his terrorist man how to pretend to be an apostate from Islam, the evil sheikh sent him to Kenya. The family of Halima and Samir has been granted resettlement in Canada. Samir pretended to be a devout Christian, attends church, and integrates his family into church life. The plan is for Samir to carry out a suicide bombing at the Christmas party, targeting Natasha, Wahid, and as many Christians as possible. On the night before the attack, Halima discovers Samir reciting the Quran and realizes he is still a committed Muslim and planning something evil. The police search Samir's apartment and discover the bombs and a recorded video confession of his true intentions and Sheikh Yasser's involvement. Here is a summary of Samir's background as it relates to the Christmas Eve terrorist plot. Samir's true identity and background. Real name, Muhammad Ahmed Mosa. Origin, born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA, to a Somali-American family. Radicalization. At age 19, Muhammad disappeared from the U.S. and joined the Al-Shabaab jihadist movement in Somalia. Alias, to return to North America undetected, he changed his name to Samir Ibrahim Salih. Terrorist training. He was selected and trained by Sheikh Yasser in Somalia to act as a sleeper terrorist, specifically to infiltrate Christian communities in Canada. Fake conversion. Samir was trained to convincingly pretend to be a Muslim who had converted to Christianity. He learned basic Christian teachings and how to act as a devout convert. Family cover. In a Nairobi refugee camp, Samir married Halima, a Somali widow/divorcee with 7 children, to create a believable family unit for refugee resettlement. Immigration to Canada. The family applied for resettlement, with Samir insisting on Canada as their destination. Upon arrival, he integrated into the Sudanese and Arabic Christian communities in Calgary, pretending to be a devout Christian. Mission. His real mission, orchestrated by Sheikh Yasser, was to carry out a suicide bombing at a large Christmas party attended by 3 churches, targeting Natasha, Wahid, and as many Christians as possible. Unraveling. The plot was foiled when Halima discovered Samir's true intentions and was murdered by him. Police intervention, prompted by suspicious neighbors, led to the discovery of the bombs and Samir's confession. Key points. Samir was never a genuine Christian convert. He was a committed jihadist using a fabricated identity. His background as an American-born Somali, his radicalization, and his ability to convincingly play the role of a Christian refugee made him the perfect undercover agent for Sheikh Yasser's plot. The plan exploited the refugee system and the trust of the Christian community. After the Christmas Eve terrorist plot was foiled in Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, here's what happened to Samir, real name Muhammad Ahmed Mosa. 1. Discovery and arrest. After Samir murdered his wife Halima, who discovered his true intentions, he attempted to dispose of her body with the help of Sheikh Yasser's local operatives. Neighbors noticed suspicious activity and called the police. The police intercepted the van carrying Halima's body, leading to a shootout. Samir was arrested by the police after the confrontation. 2. Evidence and confession. The police searched Samir's apartment and discovered bombs prepared for the attack, as well as a recorded video confession in which Samir admitted his true identity, his mission, and Sheikh Yasser's involvement. Under interrogation, Samir confessed to being a jihadist sent by Sheikh Yasser, explained how he had pretended to convert to Christianity, and detailed the plot to bomb the Christmas party. 3. Legal consequences. The police investigation and Samir's confession led to the arrest of several local accomplices and the unraveling of the entire terrorist network involved in the plot. Samir was prosecuted for the murder of his wife Halima, conspiracy to commit terrorism, and other related crimes. The novel does not specify the exact sentence, but it is clear that Samir was imprisoned and the plot was completely foiled. 4. Aftermath. The church community was saved from a mass casualty attack. Halima was buried by the Somali Muslim community, and her children were placed in foster care. The exposure of the plot led to further investigations into Sheikh Yasser's terrorist activities. In summary, Samir was arrested, confessed to his crimes, and was imprisoned after the Christmas Eve terrorist plot was foiled. His actions and confession helped authorities dismantle the terrorist cell orchestrated by Sheikh Yasser. Here's what happens to Halima and her children after the Christmas Eve terrorist plot is foiled. Halima's fate. Halima, Samir's wife, discovers on the night before the planned attack that Samir is still a committed Muslim and is planning something evil. When Halima threatens to expose Samir's true intentions, he strangles her to death. With help from Sheikh Yasser's local operatives, Halima's body is disposed of, but suspicious neighbors call the police. The police intercept the van carrying Halima's body, leading to a shootout and the unraveling of the terrorist plot. Halima's body is later found, burned and disfigured, and is identified by the police as the dead body of Samir's wife. Halima's children. After Halima's murder and Samir's arrest, the police remove her 7 children from the apartment for their safety. The children are placed in foster care while the authorities and social services determine their future. The Somali Muslim community in Calgary claims custody of the children, arguing that they were born as Muslims and have Muslim names. The church leaders attempt to intervene and prevent the children from being placed with Muslim families, but are unsuccessful because they lack official proof, such as a baptismal certificate, that Halima had converted to Christianity before her death. The matter goes to court, and after a legal battle, the Somali community wins custody. The children are entrusted to 3 Somali Muslim families. Despite adoption being forbidden in Islam, the community makes an exception to prevent the children from being raised as Christians. Summary table. Person's outcome after the plot. Halima murdered by Samir, body found and buried by the Somali Muslim community as a Muslim. Halima's children placed in foster care, then given by court order to Somali Muslim families for upbringing. In summary, Halima is tragically murdered by Samir, and her children, after a period in foster care, are placed with Somali Muslim families by court order, despite the church's efforts to keep them in Christian care. The church's reaction to the loss of custody of Halima's children is described as deeply sorrowful, persistent, and ultimately powerless in the face of legal and cultural barriers. Church's reaction to the custody loss. Immediate response. After Halima's murder and Samir's arrest, the church leaders tried to intervene to prevent Halima's 7 children from being placed with Somali Muslim families. They argued that Halima had converted to Christianity and that her children were attending Sunday school and being raised in the Christian faith. Legal and practical barriers. The church's efforts were unsuccessful because they lacked official proof, such as a baptismal certificate, that Halima had converted to Christianity before her death. The authorities and the court required documented evidence of conversion, which the church could not provide since Halima was murdered before her baptism. Court proceedings. The matter went to court, where the church, represented by Christian leaders and a lawyer, argued for the children to remain in Christian foster care. The Somali Muslim community, represented by a Muslim advocate, argued that the children were born as Muslims and should be raised as such. Outcome and grief. The court ruled in favor of the Somali community, and the children were entrusted to 3 Somali Muslim families. The church leaders were deeply disappointed and grieved by the outcome, feeling that the children were being taken away from the faith and community that had embraced them after their mother's conversion. Persistence and solidarity. Even after the court's decision, the church did not give up easily. They attended Halima's funeral, even though she was buried as a Muslim, prayed for her children, and continued to express concern for their spiritual and emotional well-being. Direct reference from the novel. The church leaders attempt to intervene and prevent the children from being placed with Muslim families, but are unsuccessful because they lack official proof, such as a baptismal certificate, that Halima had converted to Christianity before her death. The matter goes to court, and after a legal battle, the Somali community wins custody. The children are entrusted to 3 Somali Muslim families. Despite adoption being forbidden in Islam, the community makes an exception to prevent the children from being raised as Christians. Although Halima had been buried in the Muslim graveyard, still hundreds of Christians had attended and participated in her burial and prayed for the well-being of her 7 children. As a matter of fact, many of those Somali Muslims have become exceedingly happy when they came to know Samir is not an apostate but a pretender. They have also hated the late Halima with bitterness when they learned that she is the one who spoiled the jihad mission of her brave Muslim husband Samir. Although they buried her in Muslim graveyard, many of them believe she died as an accursed apostate, and she has gone to hell to burn with other infidels forever. Summary table. Church action outcome. Tried to intervene legally, unsuccessful due to lack of baptismal certificate. Attended Halima's funeral, prayed for her and her children, despite her being buried as a Muslim. Sought custody for the children lost in court. Children placed with Somali Muslim families. Ongoing concern and solidarity, continued to grieve and pray for the children, but had no further legal recourse. In summary, the church responded with compassion, advocacy, and persistent effort, but ultimately could not prevent the children from being placed with Muslim families. Their reaction is marked by sorrow, a sense of injustice, and continued spiritual concern for the children's future. Natasha and Wahid's emotional response to the foiled terrorist plot on the Christmas party is described as a mix of shock, fear, and deep gratitude, but also a sense of ongoing vulnerability and exile. How Natasha and Wahid felt about the Christmas party terrorist plot. 1. Shock and astonishment. Both Natasha and Wahid were exceedingly shocked when they learned that Samir, the undercover terrorist, was supposed to blow himself up at the Christmas party, targeting them and the entire church community. They could not believe that someone they had welcomed and befriended, Samir and Halima's family, was actually a jihadist sent to kill them. 2. Fear and anxiety. The realization that they were the primary targets of the plot left them frightened for their own safety and for the safety of their children and friends. The knowledge that Sheikh Yasser was still actively plotting against them, even after previous attacks, created a sense of ongoing danger and anxiety. 3. Survivor's guilt and disbelief. Wahid, in particular, felt a form of survivor's guilt, knowing that if the police had not foiled the plot, he would have been the one to bring his own assassin to the party in his van. Both Natasha and Wahid struggled to comprehend how someone could be so devoid of mercy as to plan the murder of innocent people, including children. 4. Sense of exile and punishment. After the plot was foiled, Natasha and Wahid were placed in protective custody and forced to leave Calgary, their church, friends, and community. They felt as if they were being punished for a crime they had no hand in, and their forced exile added to their sense of loss and displacement. 5. Gratitude and relief. Despite the trauma, they were deeply grateful to have been spared from another mass tragedy. They recognized the intervention as a miraculous escape and gave thanks for being saved from such a horrifying attack. Direct quotes from the novel. They have become exceedingly shocked and extremely frightened when they learn that Samir is supposed to blow himself up in the Christmas party and kill everyone, including his wife and her 7 children. They could not understand how a person could be so devoid of mercy and follow the evil plot of his terrorist leader and decided to murder those innocent children of Halima who have done nothing wrong to them. Why did he want to kill Pastor Wahid and Natasha, who showed him so much love? If the police did not disrupt that cowardly plot, then Pastor Wahid, Natasha, and their 2 children Nadia and Sammy would be the first ones to be blown up in bits and pieces. Pastor Wahid is the one who always brought in his van the Somali family to the church and after the service dropped them back in their apartment. Therefore, if Calgary police did not foil that plot, then Pastor Wahid would have brought his assassin in his own vehicle to the Christmas party where the latter is planning to blow his body up in smithereens and kill with him as many as possible of those innocent Christians. They felt that they had been punished for a crime that they had no hands in it. They understood that their continuous presence in Calgary would pose a threat to the lives of many innocent people. Because of them, the evil terrorist leader Sheikh Yasser had killed before over 500 innocent people. They have reluctantly accepted the new arrangements and agreed to abide by the law. But they're worried that they might be in the run from the evil man Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din for the rest of their lives. Summary table. Feeling Natasha and Wahid's response. Shock and fear, exceedingly shocked and frightened by the plot and its personal targeting. Survivor's guilt. Wahid felt guilt knowing he could have brought the assassin to the party himself. Disbelief, could not comprehend the mercilessness of the plot. Exile and punishment, felt punished and exiled, forced to leave their community and live in hiding. Gratitude and relief, grateful for the miraculous escape and for being spared another mass tragedy. In summary, Natasha and Wahid felt a complex mix of shock, fear, and gratitude after the Christmas party terrorist plot was foiled. The event deepened their sense of vulnerability and exile, but also reinforced their resilience and commitment to protecting their family and each other. After the Christmas Eve terrorist plot and the earlier wedding attack, Natasha and Wahid did not return to Calgary. Instead, after the foiled Christmas party plot, they were placed in protective custody by the police for their safety. They were relocated to a small town in Ontario, far from Calgary, and were banned from returning to Calgary or any other city in Western Canada. Their names were changed for protection, and they had to live under new identities for a period of time. Here's a direct summary from the novel. Accordingly, the Muhammad Ahmed 4 family members have been forced against their wishes to leave their city, church, friends, colleges, and go to a ridiculously small place in eastern Canada. They have been banned forever from returning to the city where they always used to live in. They felt that they had been punished for a crime that they had no hands in it. They understood that their continuous presence in Calgary would pose a threat to the lives of many innocent people. Because of them, the evil terrorist leader Sheikh Yasser had killed before over 500 innocent people. They have reluctantly accepted the new arrangements and agreed to abide by the law. But they're worried that they might be in the run from the evil man Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din for the rest of their lives. After their period in protective custody, they moved to Toronto and started a new life there, joining a church community and focusing on rebuilding their family and careers. There is no indication in the novel that they ever returned to Calgary. In summary, Natasha and Wahid never returned to Calgary after the terrorist plots. Their exile was permanent for their safety, and their new life continued in Ontario. Natasha and Wahid's adaptation to life in Ontario after being exiled from Calgary is described as a journey of resilience, gradual healing, and rebuilding. How Natasha and Wahid adapted to life in Ontario. 1. Protective custody and new identities. After the foiled Christmas Eve terrorist plot, Natasha, Wahid, and their children were placed in protective custody in a small town in Ontario. Their names were changed for safety, and they were banned from returning to Calgary or any city in Western Canada. They felt isolated and exiled, but accepted the arrangement for the safety of themselves and others. 2. Building a new life in Toronto. After 6 months in protective custody, they moved to Toronto to start over. They joined a new church community, focusing on rebuilding their family and careers. Wahid found a part-time job and continued his studies at a Bible college, while Natasha resumed her university education. Mrs. Mary Morgus, Wahid's adoptive mother, joined them in Canada and became a source of emotional and practical support, helping with childcare and household management. 3. Emotional and social adjustment. The family struggled with the trauma of exile, loss of community, and the constant threat from Sheikh Yasser. Despite these challenges, they found comfort in their faith, each other, and the support of their new church and friends. Natasha and her mother-in-law developed a close bond, and the family established new routines and traditions, such as sharing tea and Sudanese cakes together. 4. Rebuilding community and purpose. Natasha and Wahid chose not to join any Sudanese tribal church in Toronto, preferring a Coptic Christian church for its inclusivity and anonymity. They focused on their studies and personal growth, with Natasha pursuing advanced degrees in religious studies and Wahid continuing his theological education. The family gradually integrated into their new environment, finding meaning in advocacy, education, and service. 5. Ongoing challenges and resilience. The trauma of their past, the loss of loved ones, and the stigma of their experiences continued to affect them. They faced setbacks, including Natasha's mental health crisis and the death of Mrs. Mary Morgus, but persevered with the help of friends like Almaz Abraham and the broader church community. Over time, Natasha and Wahid rebuilt their sense of identity, belonging, and hope, using their experiences to help others and advocate for justice. Direct reference from the novel. Accordingly, the Muhammad Ahmed 4 family members have been forced against their wishes to leave their city, church, friends, colleges, and go to a ridiculously small place in eastern Canada. They have been banned forever from returning to the city where they always used to live in. After their period in protective custody, they moved to Toronto and started a new life there, joining a church community and focusing on rebuilding their family and careers. Mrs. Mary Morgus arrived in Canada at a time her son and his family have neither place of their own nor stable income. Even so, it is one of the happiest days for Samir and Nadia Ahmed. She is an exceptionally loving and friendly woman. Nadia loved her from the first day she met her. Mrs. Mary Morgus encouraged her to go back to the university and continue her education. She promised that she would take care of her grandchildren. Summary table. Adaptation aspect: how Natasha and Wahid adapted. Protective custody: accepted new identities, lived in exile for safety. New community in Toronto: joined a church, focused on studies and work, rebuilt routines. Emotional support: relied on each other, Mrs. Mary Morgas, and friends like Almaz Abraha. Rebuilding purpose: pursued education, advocacy, and service, integrated into new church and social circles. Ongoing challenges: faced trauma, loss, and stigma, but persevered with resilience and hope. In summary, Natasha and Wahid adapted to life in Ontario by relying on faith, family, and supportive friends, rebuilding their lives through education and community, and transforming their suffering into advocacy and hope for the future. Wahid decides to bring his mother, Mrs. Mary Morgas, from Sudan to Canada primarily for practical family support and emotional reasons. Key reasons Wahid brings his mother to Canada. 1. Childcare and family stability. After Wahid and Natasha are exiled to Ontario, they face the challenge of raising two young children, Nadia and Sammy, while both are students with limited income and no extended family nearby. They realize that hiring a babysitter for two children would consume most of their income, making it impractical for either of them to continue their education or work full-time. Wahid proposes bringing his mother from Sudan so she can help take care of the children, allowing Natasha to continue her university studies and Wahid to pursue his theological education and part-time work. 2. Emotional support and family reunification. Mrs. Mary Morgas is not just Wahid's adoptive mother, but also a source of deep emotional support and stability for the family. Natasha, who lost her own mother as a child, longs for a mother figure and is overjoyed at the prospect of having Mrs. Mary Morgas in their home. The arrival of Mrs. Mary Morgas brings joy, organization, and a sense of family completeness to their household. 3. Cultural and practical adaptation. Mrs. Mary Morgas's experience running an orphanage in Sudan makes her exceptionally capable of managing a household and caring for children. Her presence helps the family adapt to life in Canada, maintain cultural traditions, and establish new routines and support systems in their new environment. Direct reference from the novel. When both solutions seemed to be impractical, Pastor Wahid proposed a third alternative. He proposed that they should sponsor his mother and bring her from Sudan to Canada to take care of her two grandchildren. Natasha is exceedingly overjoyed when her husband came up with such a brilliant idea. Mrs. Mary Morgas encouraged her to go back to the university and continue her education. She promised that she would take care of her grandchildren. Summary table. Reason how it helped. Childcare and stability allowed Natasha and Wahid to continue their education and work. Emotional support provided Natasha with a mother figure and the family with love and encouragement. Practical adaptation brought organization, cultural continuity, and household management skills. In summary, Wahid brings his mother, Mrs. Mary Morgas, from Sudan to Canada to help care for his children, support Natasha's education, and provide the family with emotional and practical stability as they rebuild their lives in Ontario. Wahid, also known as Gurgis Gabriel, reveals his tragic past in Sudan to his wife Natasha for several intertwined reasons, all rooted in trauma, survival, and the need for honesty and healing in their new life together. Why Wahid reveals his tragedy to Natasha. 1. Practical necessity for family support. Wahid and Natasha, struggling as students with two young children and no extended family in Canada, realize they need help. Wahid proposes bringing his adoptive mother, Mrs. Mary Morgas, from Sudan to Canada to help with childcare. To do this, Wahid must explain to Natasha who Mrs. Mary is and why she is so important to him, which requires revealing his true background and the story of his abandonment and upbringing in Sudan. 2. Emotional honesty and trust. Wahid has been carrying the burden of his hidden identity and the stigma of being an illegitimate child in Sudan. He initially concealed his true origins, even changing his name and fabricating a story of being a Muslim convert to Christianity to gain acceptance in Canada. As their family faces new challenges and Natasha presses him for the truth, especially after her grandfather's earlier hints about Wahid's past, Wahid feels compelled to be honest with his wife about his origins, his suffering, and the reasons for his reinvention. 3. Healing and reconciliation. Wahid's confession is also an act of seeking healing and reconciliation, not just with Natasha, but with himself. By sharing his pain and the truth of his past, he hopes to build a foundation of trust and understanding in their marriage and to free himself from the shame and secrecy that haunted his life in Sudan. 4. Breaking the cycle of shame and silence. The novel repeatedly emphasizes the destructive power of secrecy and shame in both Wahid's and Natasha's families. By revealing his tragedy, Wahid takes a step toward breaking the cycle, allowing both himself and Natasha to confront their pasts and move forward with greater honesty and resilience. Direct reference from the novel. Natasha did not only come to know that her husband had lied about his place of birth and family, but he fooled her about his claim to be born and brought up as a Muslim boy. He admitted that he has never been a Muslim all his life. He was born to a Muslim mother, but brought up by Christian parents. He has seen neither his mother nor his father in all his life. He learned from his Christian parents that he is an illegitimate child. His mother gave birth to him in an orphanage owned by the Christian couple who brought him up. On the same day his mother gave birth to him, she had dumped him like refuse in that orphanage and disappeared from his life forever. In addition, Pastor Wahid confessed that his real name isn't Omar or Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. He had been named by his Christian parents as Gurgis Gabriel. When he came to Canada, he changed his name to Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. He did that because he knew that Gurgis Gabriel is a Coptic Christian name. He is aware that he does not look like a Sudanese Coptic Christian, but in every way, he resembled an Arab Muslim. He learned from his Christian parents that his real Sudanese mother and father are Arab Muslims. He remembered that such a mixed-up personality created a lot of harassment and persecution for him in Sudan and led to a serious identity crisis. To avoid the recurrence of such social stigma and not to be an odd individual among the Sudanese Muslim community in Canada, he faked that false claim of being born and brought up as a Muslim, but when he grew up, he rejected Islam and accepted Christianity. Summary table. Reason for revelation explanation. Practical family support needed to explain who Mrs. Mary Morgus is and why she should join them in Canada. Emotional honesty and trust wanted to build a foundation of truth in his marriage and free himself from shame. Healing and reconciliation sought to heal from his past by sharing it with Natasha. Breaking the cycle of secrecy aimed to end the destructive silence and shame that haunted both their families. In summary, Wahid reveals his tragedy in Sudan to Natasha out of necessity, honesty, and a desire for healing and trust. This act becomes a turning point in their relationship, allowing both to confront their pasts and move forward with greater understanding and resilience. Certainly. Here's a detailed tracing of Wahid's tragic life in Sudan and Egypt as he tells it to his wife Natasha, based on the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. Wahid's tragic life in Sudan. 1. Birth and abandonment. Wahid, originally named Gurgis Gabriel, was born as an illegitimate child in Sudan. His biological mother, a Muslim woman, gave birth to him in a Christian orphanage run by Mr. and Mrs. Morgus and abandoned him there immediately after birth. He never knew his real parents. The orphanage did not keep records of biological parents, only vague hints about his possible tribal origins. 2. Growing up as an outcast. Wahid was raised by the Morgus family, who were childless and ran the orphanage for illegitimate children. Despite their love, he grew up facing relentless discrimination and social stigma. In Sudanese society, being a Wad Haram bastard is considered worse than being a prostitute or a criminal. Both Muslims and Christians treated him as an outcast. In public Islamic schools, he was bullied by teachers and classmates for being a Christian with an Arab name. He was forced to leave the classroom during Islamic lessons and was often beaten and ostracized. Even in Christian schools, he was bullied for his ambiguous background and lack of family. 3. Identity crisis and anger. Wahid felt like an untouchable, similar to the lowest castes in other societies. He developed deep anger and resentment toward both Muslims and Christians for their cruelty and hypocrisy. He was never able to fully belong to either community, not accepted by the Arab Muslim elite nor by the Coptic Christian community. 4. Search for belonging and escape. Despite his hardships, Wahid was intelligent and managed to complete his schooling. However, the pain of not belonging anywhere left him with a fractured sense of self. Realizing that Sudan would never accept him, and encouraged by his caretakers, he sought refugee status abroad, hoping to find a place where he could live with dignity. Wahid's life in Egypt. 1. Attempt to start anew. Wahid traveled to Egypt, following the advice of his Christian caretakers, who wrote a letter describing his harsh life in Sudan and recommending him for refugee status on humanitarian grounds. He applied for refugee status at the United Nations office in Cairo, but his application was rejected because only those from war-torn regions like South Sudan or Darfur were being accepted. 2. Life as a servant. Unable to return to Sudan and with no support in Egypt, Wahid worked as a servant in Egyptian homes for 2 years. He did menial jobs: cleaning, washing, ironing, babysitting, and nursing. In Egypt, house servants are treated as slaves, and Wahid faced further humiliation and exploitation. 3. Continued rejection and survival. Wahid's ambiguous identity and lack of family continued to haunt him. He was never able to escape the stigma of his birth. Despite these hardships, he found a Christian group in Cairo and joined them, which provided some sense of community and hope. 4. Opportunity for a new life. Through the Christian group, Wahid was able to get admission to a Bible college in Calgary, Canada, on a student visa. This opportunity marked the beginning of his journey out of the cycle of rejection and stigma. How Wahid tells Natasha. When Wahid reveals his past to Natasha, he explains. He lied about his background in Canada, claiming to be a Muslim convert to Christianity to gain acceptance among Sudanese and Arab communities. He changed his name from Gurgis Gabriel to Wahid Muhammad Ahmed to avoid the stigma of his Coptic Christian name and illegitimate birth. He shares the pain of being abandoned by his biological parents, the cruelty of Sudanese society, and the constant struggle for identity and belonging. He confesses that his reinvention was a survival strategy, not a betrayal, and that meeting Natasha and building a family with her was his first experience of genuine love and acceptance. In summary, Wahid's life in Sudan and Egypt was marked by abandonment, relentless social stigma, identity crisis, and survival against overwhelming odds. His story, as told to Natasha, is one of pain, resilience, and the desperate search for dignity and belonging, a central thread in the novel's exploration of trauma, identity, and hope. This passage is based directly on the novel's text and summarizes Wahid's own words and feelings as he reveals his past. Wahid tells Natasha about his childhood. That day, Natasha did not only come to know that her husband had lied about his place of birth and family, but he fooled her about his claim to be born and brought up as a Muslim boy. He admitted that he has never been a Muslim all his life. He was born to a Muslim mother, but brought up by Christian parents. He has seen neither his mother nor his father in all his life. He learned from his Christian parents that he is an illegitimate child. His mother gave birth to him in an orphanage owned by the Christian couple who brought him up. On the same day his mother gave birth to him, she had dumped him like refuse in that orphanage and disappeared from his life forever. In addition, Pastor Wahid confessed that his real name isn't Omar or Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. He had been named by his Christian parents as Gurgis Gabriel. When he came to Canada, he changed his name to Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. He did that because he knew that Gurgis Gabriel is a Coptic Christian name. He is aware that he does not look like a Sudanese Coptic Christian, but in every way, he resembled an Arab Muslim. He learned from his Christian parents that his real Sudanese mother and father are Arab Muslims. He remembered that such a mixed-up personality created a lot of harassment and persecution for him in Sudan and led to a serious identity crisis. To avoid the recurrence of such social stigma and not to be an odd individual among the Sudanese Muslim community in Canada, he faked that false claim of being born and brought up as a Muslim, but when he grew up, he rejected Islam and accepted Christianity. Wahid continues, describing his childhood in Sudan. I was born as an illegitimate child in Sudan. My biological mother, a Muslim woman, gave birth to me in a Christian orphanage run by Mr. and Mrs. Morgas and abandoned me there immediately after birth. I never knew my real parents. The orphanage did not keep records of biological parents, only vague hints about my possible tribal origins. I was raised by the Morgas family, who were childless and ran the orphanage for illegitimate children. Despite their love, I grew up facing relentless discrimination and social stigma. In Sudanese society, being a Wad Haram bastard is considered worse than being a prostitute or a criminal. Both Muslims and Christians treated me as an outcast. In public, Islamic schools, I was bullied by teachers and classmates for being a Christian with an Arab name. I was forced to leave the classroom during Islamic lessons and was often beaten and ostracized. Even in Christian schools, I was bullied for my ambiguous background and lack of family. I felt like an untouchable, similar to the lowest castes in other societies. I developed deep anger and resentment toward both Muslims and Christians for their cruelty and hypocrisy. I was never able to fully belong to either community, not accepted by the Arab Muslim elite nor by the Coptic Christian community. Despite my hardships, I managed to complete my schooling. However, the pain of not belonging anywhere left me with a fractured sense of self. Realizing that Sudan would never accept me, and encouraged by my caretakers, I sought refugee status abroad, hoping to find a place where I could live with dignity. This scene is a turning point in Wahid and Natasha's relationship, as Wahid's honesty about his painful childhood and identity crisis helps Natasha understand the depth of his trauma and the reasons behind his choices. During his schooling, Gurgis Gabriel was constantly harassed by other children when the news reached the school that he was Wad Haram, which means a bastard boy. The stigmatized concept of the Wad al-Haram is very offensive and destructive in a Muslim country. In Muslim society, the Wad Haram or Bint Haram is more disgraceful and abhorrent than a prostitute or a gay. A Muslim boy might tolerate if he is called a gay and a Muslim girl a prostitute, but none of them would tolerate being labeled as Wad Haram or Bint Haram. Gurgis hated his real parents who abandoned him. He hated the society where he was born and brought up in. His Christian caretakers registered him in a public school with many of its students being Muslims. Although it is called a public school, it is an Islamic madrasa. The madrasa is the establishment of learning where the Islamic sciences are taught. In that school, Gurgis was always harassed by his teachers as well as his classmates. His teachers discriminated against him because he was an Arab but had a Coptic Christian name. His classmates reproached him because he was a Christian boy. In that school, Islam was the only religion taught on a daily basis. Whenever the Islamic class came, he had to leave the classroom and sit outside all alone. Many times, he got beaten up by bigger Muslim boys for being an Arab Christian. When his persecution reached beyond his ability to tolerate it, he refused to go to school. His caretakers understood his insurmountable problem and transferred him to a private Christian school. Summary of the scene. Wahid's first memory of school bullying is being singled out and harassed for being a Wad Haram bastard in a public Islamic school. He was forced to leave the classroom during Islamic lessons, bullied by both teachers and classmates for his ambiguous identity, and physically beaten by older boys. The experience left him feeling like an outcast and deeply wounded, shaping his anger and sense of not belonging. Here's a description of the private Christian school that Wahid, Gurgis Gabriel, was transferred to, as depicted in Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. After Wahid's Gurgasa's traumatic experiences in the public Islamic school, his caretakers transferred him to a private Christian school. This school was notably different from the public school. Exclusivity and fees. The private Christian school charged high fees and did not provide school supplies or textbooks. Students had to pay for everything themselves, making it accessible mainly to those who could afford it. The orphanage had never sent a child to a private school before Gurgas, highlighting the exceptional nature of his case. Student body. The students were primarily from the Coptic Christian community, which is described as closed, exclusive, and proud of its purity. The Copts did not marry outside their community and looked down on outsiders, including other Sudanese Christians and especially anyone with ambiguous or tainted backgrounds. Atmosphere and social dynamics. Even in this Christian environment, Gurgas was not accepted. He was bullied and discriminated against for his ambiguous identity and lack of family. The Coptic Christian students and teachers treated him as an outsider, and he was often the target of ridicule and exclusion. Academic environment. Despite the discrimination, Gurgas managed to stay in the private Christian school until he finished grade 12. The school's academic standards were high, but the social environment was harsh for anyone who did not fit the community's strict norms. Summary. The private Christian school was academically reputable and exclusive, but socially rigid and unwelcoming to outsiders or those with shameful backgrounds. For Wahid, it was another place of alienation. He was bullied for being different, and the experience deepened his sense of not belonging anywhere, whether among Muslims or Christians. Wahid's hardships in Egypt. After Wahid's Gurgas's painful childhood in Sudan, he sought a new life in Egypt, hoping for dignity and acceptance. Instead, he faced a new set of challenges. Refugee status denied. Wahid traveled to Egypt with a letter from his Christian caretakers, describing his harsh life as an illegitimate child in Sudan and recommending him for refugee status on humanitarian grounds. However, the United Nations office in Cairo rejected his application because only those from war-torn regions like South Sudan or Darfur were being accepted at the time. Poverty and menial labor. Unable to return to Sudan and with no support in Egypt, Wahid was forced to work as a servant in Egyptian homes for 2 years. He did menial jobs, cleaning, washing, ironing, babysitting, and nursing. In Egypt, house servants are treated as slaves, and Wahid faced further humiliation and exploitation. Social isolation and exploitation. As a foreigner and a servant, Wahid was at the bottom of the social hierarchy. He was vulnerable to abuse and had no social safety net or community to support him. The text notes that in the Middle East, it is common for domestic workers, especially women, to be sexually harassed or abused by their employers. While Wahid was not a woman, he still experienced the broader exploitation and lack of dignity that came with his status. Continued stigma and lack of belonging. Wahid's ambiguous identity and lack of family continued to haunt him. He was never able to escape the stigma of his birth, and he remained an outsider in Egyptian society. Wahid's hardships in Egypt. After Wahid's Gurgas's painful childhood in Sudan, he sought a new life in Egypt, hoping for dignity and acceptance. Instead, he faced a new set of challenges. Refugee status denied. Wahid traveled to Egypt with a letter from his Christian caretakers, describing his harsh life as an illegitimate child in Sudan and recommending him for refugee status on humanitarian grounds. However, the United Nations office in Cairo rejected his application because only those from war-torn regions like South Sudan or Darfur were being accepted at the time. Poverty and menial labor. Unable to return to Sudan and with no support in Egypt, Wahid was forced to work as a servant in Egyptian homes for 2 years. He did menial jobs, cleaning, washing, ironing, babysitting, and nursing. In Egypt, house servants are treated as slaves, and Wahid faced further humiliation and exploitation. Social isolation and exploitation. As a foreigner and a servant, Wahid was at the bottom of the social hierarchy. He was vulnerable to abuse and had no social safety net or community to support him. The text notes that in the Middle East, it is common for domestic workers, especially women, to be sexually harassed or abused by their employers. While Wahid was not a woman, he still experienced the broader exploitation and lack of dignity that came with his status. Continued stigma and lack of belonging. Wahid's ambiguous identity and lack of family continued to haunt him. He was never able to escape the stigma of his birth, and he remained an outsider in Egyptian society. Desperation and survival. Despite these hardships, Wahid managed to survive by joining a Christian group in Cairo, which provided him with some sense of community and hope. Through this group, he eventually received an opportunity to attend a Bible college in Calgary, Canada, on a student visa, marking the beginning of his journey out of the cycle of rejection and hardship. In summary, Wahid's time in Egypt was marked by poverty, exploitation, social isolation, and the continued pain of being an outcast. His experience there was a continuation of the hardships he faced in Sudan, and it was only through the support of a Christian group that he was able to find a path to a new life in Canada. How Sheikh Yasser orchestrated the terrorist attacks in India. 1. The mastermind and motivation. Sheikh Yasser, after becoming a powerful religious leader and terrorist mastermind, decided to carry out a major attack on Western targets in India while he was on his honeymoon with his young Egyptian bride. His motivation was to inflict severe pain on the enemies of Allah by targeting the American and Canadian embassies in New Delhi, India. 2. Planning and delegation. Yasser never wrote down his plans. Everything was communicated orally to avoid leaving evidence. He contacted a trusted Egyptian associate and instructed him to travel to Pakistan to recruit Pakistani religious leaders and militants for the operation. 3. Multinational coordination. The plan required Pakistani militants, Mujahideen, to enter India and find local Hindus who could be coerced or bribed into smuggling bombs into the embassies. Yasser's plan was to use non-Muslims, Hindus, as the operatives to avoid suspicion and make the attack harder to trace back to Islamic groups. 4. Recruitment and coercion of local operatives. The Pakistani militants in India identified 5 Hindu electricity company workers who had families. These men were offered $10,000 each and threatened with death for themselves and their families if they refused to cooperate. The plan was for these workers to use their positions to gain access to the embassies under the pretense of fixing a power outage. 5. Execution of the attack. The Hindu workers created a power failure in the embassy neighborhood the night before the attack. On the day of the attack, 3 of the workers went to the embassies to fix the outage, carrying the bombs with them. Due to the blackout, embassy guards could not use electronic devices for checks and relied on the workers' government-issued IDs, which showed them as Hindus and thus did not arouse suspicion. The bombs were successfully planted inside the embassies. 6. Detonation and aftermath. The bombs were detonated by remote control the next morning, killing everyone inside both embassies, employees, guards, visitors, and bystanders. The attack was devastating, with no survivors and bodies shattered beyond recognition. Indian police eventually identified and arrested the 5 Hindu workers, who confessed under torture but could not provide information leading to the higher-level masterminds. The attack was officially blamed on Pakistan's ISI and the Lashkar-e-Taiba group, but the true mastermind, Sheikh Yasser, remained undetected and was in Canada at the time. Summary table: Sheikh Yasser's terrorist attack in India. Step details. Mastermind Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din. Target American and Canadian embassies in New Delhi, India. Recruitment Pakistani militants recruited in Pakistan. Local Hindu electricity workers in India. Method bribery and death threats to Hindu workers. Use of power outage as cover. Execution bombs smuggled in by workers posing as repairmen during blackout. Detonation remote-controlled bombs detonated the next morning, causing mass casualties. Aftermath workers arrested, confessed, attack blamed on Pakistani groups, Yasser remained at large. In essence, Sheikh Yasser orchestrated the attacks with meticulous planning, international coordination, and by exploiting local vulnerabilities. He used non-Muslim operatives to avoid detection, ensured he was not physically present, and left no written evidence, making the attack both devastating and difficult to trace back to him. If you'd like a direct quote or more detail from the novel, let me know. How Sheikh Yasser avoided detection. No written evidence. Yasser never wrote down his plans. All instructions and details were communicated orally, ensuring there was no paper trail or digital record that could be traced back to him. Delegation through trusted intermediaries. He used trusted associates to carry out each stage of the plan. For example, he instructed an Egyptian associate to travel to Pakistan and recruit Pakistani militants, who in turn recruited local Hindu operatives in India. This multi-layered delegation made it difficult to link the operation directly to Yasser. Use of non-Muslim operatives. Yasser's plan specifically involved using local Hindu electricity workers in India to smuggle the bombs into the embassies. By employing non-Muslims as the direct perpetrators, he diverted suspicion away from Islamic groups and made the attack harder to trace to its true origin. Bribery and coercion. The Hindu workers were bribed and threatened, ensuring their silence and compliance. Their involvement appeared to be a local criminal act rather than an international terrorist plot. Exploiting local infrastructure. The attack was disguised as a routine power outage repair, allowing the operatives to enter the embassies without arousing suspicion. The blackout also prevented the use of electronic security checks. Physical absence and alibi. Yasser ensured he was not present in India or even in a country he had visited before at the time of the attack. He was in Canada during the bombings, providing a solid alibi and making it nearly impossible for authorities to connect him to the crime. No direct contact with bombers. The operatives who planted the bombs had no direct contact with Yasser. They only interacted with their immediate handlers, who themselves were several steps removed from Yasser. International coordination without trace. All coordination between countries, Pakistan, India, Egypt, Canada, was done through trusted individuals, with no direct links or communications that could be intercepted or traced. Blame shifted to others. The attack was officially blamed on Pakistan's ISI and the Lashkar-e-Taiba group, as the arrested Hindu workers could only confess to their immediate contacts, not to the true mastermind. In summary, Yasser avoided detection by never leaving a written or digital trail, using multiple layers of intermediaries, employing non-Muslim operatives, maintaining a physical alibi, and ensuring that all evidence pointed away from himself and toward other groups or individuals. Pakistan's role in the India terrorist attacks as depicted in the novel. Recruitment and coordination. Sheikh Yasser, while planning the attacks on the American and Canadian embassies in New Delhi, India, contacted a trusted Egyptian associate and instructed him to travel to Pakistan. The Egyptian associate's mission in Pakistan was to recruit Pakistani religious leaders and militants for the operation. Pakistani militants as key operatives. The plan required Pakistani militants, Mujahideen, to enter India. These militants were responsible for finding local Hindu electricity workers in India who could be bribed or threatened into smuggling bombs into the embassies. Logistics and threats. The Pakistani militants in India identified 5 Hindu electricity company workers with families. These workers were offered $10,000 each and threatened with death for themselves and their families if they refused to cooperate. The Pakistani militants orchestrated the creation of a power failure in the embassy neighborhood, which allowed the bombs to be smuggled in under the guise of a repair operation. Aftermath and blame. After the bombs were detonated by remote control, killing everyone inside both embassies, the Indian police eventually identified and arrested the 5 Hindu workers. Under torture, the workers confessed their roles, but could not provide information leading to the higher-level masterminds. The attack was officially blamed on Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba group, as the arrested workers could only confess to their immediate contacts, not to the true mastermind, Sheikh Yasser. The Delhi police's investigation ended with a public statement. The whole attack was planned by Pakistan's ISI and carried out by the Muslim terrorists of the terrorist group of the Lashkar-e-Taiba and their operatives in India. Summary table. Pakistan's role. Aspect details. Recruitment: Pakistani religious leaders and militants recruited by Yasser's Egyptian associate. Operatives: Pakistani militants entered India to coordinate with local Hindu workers. Logistics: Pakistani militants orchestrated the power outage and bribed/threatened local workers. Official blame: Indian authorities blamed Pakistan's ISI and Lashkar-e-Taiba for the embassy bombings. Mastermind: Sheikh Yasser remained undetected and was not physically present in India. In essence, Pakistan's role, as depicted in the novel, was as the base for recruiting and deploying militants who coordinated the attack inside India. The official investigation and public narrative in the story place the blame for the embassy bombings on Pakistan's intelligence agency, ISI, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba group, even though the true mastermind, Sheikh Yasser, remained hidden and orchestrated the plot from afar. The global reaction to the terrorist attacks on the American and Canadian embassies in India, as depicted in the context of Natasha and her illegitimate child, in a Muslim society, and reflected in recent real-world analogues, was one of widespread condemnation, solidarity with India, and calls for restraint and dialogue between India and Pakistan. 1. Immediate condemnation and solidarity. World leaders across the geopolitical spectrum, including the US, Russia, China, the UK, France, Israel, Germany, Italy, Japan, and many others, condemned the attacks in the strongest terms. US President Donald Trump called the incident deeply disturbing, offering full support to India and expressing hope for swift justice. Russian President Vladimir Putin described it as a brutal crime with no justification whatsoever. The UK, Germany, Denmark, Italy, and other European leaders expressed condolences and reaffirmed their support for India's fight against terrorism. West Asian countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Iran, Israel, Egypt, etc., also condemned the attacks and expressed solidarity with India, with Israel explicitly supporting India's right to self-defense. Fortune India. +5. 2. UN and major powers response. The United Nations called for restraint and urged both India and Pakistan to prioritize peace and stability, avoid escalation, and resolve issues through dialogue and diplomacy. The UN Secretary-General and Security Council expressed concern over the escalation and condemned the attacks. Al Jazeera. +1. France, China, and Iran called for restraint and de-escalation, understanding India's right to self-defense, but urging both sides to avoid further conflict. Israel and some Western allies explicitly supported India's right to defend itself against terrorism. Al Jazeera. 3. Diplomatic outreach and engagement. India launched a global diplomatic outreach after its counterstrikes, Operation Sindoor, briefing key powers, US, UK, Russia, China, France, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Japan, etc., to explain the rationale behind its actions and to emphasize that the strikes were targeted, measured, and non-escalatory. The U.S. Secretary of State and other major powers monitored the situation closely, urging both India and Pakistan to avoid escalation and continue diplomatic engagement. No Indian Express. 4. International organizations and regional reactions. Over 60 countries and international organizations swiftly condemned the attacks, including India's South Asian neighbors, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, East Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, and the European Union. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, and other Islamic organizations also condemned the violence, with even the Taliban offering condolences to the victims. India's World. 5. Focus on Pakistan's role. Many statements and media coverage highlighted the role of Pakistan-based groups Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, ISI, in orchestrating the attacks, with calls for Pakistan to take concrete action against terror infrastructure on its soil. Some countries, while condemning terrorism, stopped short of directly naming Pakistan, instead urging restraint and dialogue. 6. Calls for justice and counter-terrorism cooperation. There was a unified call for justice for the victims and for the perpetrators and their backers to be brought to account. Several leaders and organizations reaffirmed their commitment to global counterterrorism cooperation and expressed support for India's efforts to combat terrorism. In summary, the global reaction was one of universal condemnation of the attacks, strong expressions of solidarity with India, and calls for restraint and dialogue to prevent further escalation between India and Pakistan. The attacks were seen as a grave violation of international norms, and there was a clear demand for accountability and a reaffirmation of the international community's commitment to fighting terrorism. The overwhelming majority of the world, including the US, UK, France, Russia, Israel, and most of the UN either supported India's right to self-defense or called for restraint and dialogue. Countries that supported Pakistan. 1. China. China expressed regret over India's military actions, called for restraint from both sides, and provided diplomatic cover for Pakistan. China also reportedly provided intelligence and strategic support to Pakistan during the conflict. Money control. 2. Turkey. Turkey strongly backed Pakistan, describing India's strikes as an unprovoked violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. Turkey also supplied drones to Pakistan and condemned India's actions. First post. +1. 3. Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan expressed diplomatic solidarity with Pakistan, condemning India's military actions and stating it would stand shoulder to shoulder with Pakistan. Azerbaijan's support is largely symbolic but consistent with its trilateral partnership with Turkey and Pakistan. Northwest News. +1. 4. Malaysia and Iran limited cautious mediation. Some reports mention that Malaysia and Iran offered to mediate and supported Pakistan's call for an independent investigation into the attacks, but their support was more about mediation and de-escalation rather than outright backing Pakistan's position. Hammerweb. Global context. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India stated in Parliament that only 3 out of 193 United Nations member countries backed Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, specifically pointing to China, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. Money control. +1. The rest of the world either supported India or called for restraint and peaceful resolution. Summary table. Country nature of support for Pakistan. China diplomatic, intelligence, strategic, called for restraint, condemned Indian strikes. Turkey strong diplomatic and military support, condemned India, supplied drones. Azerbaijan diplomatic solidarity, condemned India's actions. Malaysia supported call for investigation, offered mediation, limited. Iran offered mediation, called for investigation, but also urged restraint. In summary, China, Turkey, and Azerbaijan were the only countries that clearly supported Pakistan after the attacks and during India's military response. Malaysia and Iran offered limited, mediation-focused support. The rest of the world either supported India or called for restraint and dialogue.